Hi everyone, just before we begin this podcast, I would like to mention our brilliant sponsor, A&L Goodbody. A&L Goodbody is a leading Irish corporate law firm and one which really recognises the importance of their graduate recruitment programme. They have recently been voted the most popular graduate employer in law for the 10th year in a row. If you are looking for the chance to develop your career in a supportive, innovative and collaborative environment, A&L Goodbody can provide this in a modern, exciting, diverse and friendly surrounding, and I would really recommend you check out their graduate recruitment opportunities.
Hi guys, Isabel here and welcome back to the Grad Life podcast. Today I'm chatting with Charlie Norton, a silver medalist at the Paralympic Games. In this varied podcast, we'll talk about everything from his path to rowing to his disability, accident and recovery. We also discuss social justice in the form of disability in sport and Charlie's Black Lives Matter protest on the Paralympic podium. This is an inspiring podcast for anyone interested in sport or social justice. So hi Charlie, thank you for joining me today on the Grad Life podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So normally I bring it right back to the start when I'm interviewing people and I ask them why they decided to study what they study, but this podcast is a little bit different because it's more sports based with you. So I'm going to ask you when you started sports and what sports you started in.
Yeah, totally. So I have been involved in sports kind of my whole life. From like a very young age, I was like a soccer player. And then I think I probably started like really getting competitively into sports in high school with distance running, kind of like cross country, track and field. I like really found a love for that kind of like power endurance sport. And through like an injury, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, that career ended. And then I got into rowing. So that happened my junior year of high school. I didn't really do any sports senior year of high school. And then I went to Gonzaga University in the States and walked on the rowing team just to kind of try something new. Another one of those power endurance sports, fell in love with it immediately. And kind of next thing I know, I was all in, fully committed to it and loved it. So.
And had you ever, I know rowing's unique in that fact that you can pick it up within a year, but had you ever considered it before or heard of it?
No, I really have. I mean, so I grew up in the Bay Area in Oakland, and it's definitely not like a huge sport there. So I hadn't really heard of it. Honestly, kind of the appeal freshman year is like I really wanted to try something different and new, and it was just so far out of my comfort zone. So that was like kind of a turn on for me. I was like, that seems really cool. I want to do that.
And then you referenced it actually in my first question when you said that you had an accident in junior year, which kind of changed your path in sports and your path in life completely. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, totally. So my junior year, I was out on a training trip running with the cross country team. And there was like kind of a rope swing that went out kind of over this cliff. And it was really fun. You just kind of went out on it. We'd been on it a ton of times. It really wasn't like a big deal at all. And the day that I happened to be on it, it was just really unfortunate. But the rope swing broke while I was out over the cliff. And I fell, almost 40 feet and ended up having burst fractures in my L3, L4, and L5 vertebrae. And I also broke my wrist. So that resulted in some pretty serious nerve damage to my right leg. My right calf basically doesn't work at all. My right glute works at around like 30 to 40%. And I can't feel almost all of my right leg due to the nerve damage. So on top of it, being really not fun and like there were definitely a couple of really bad days, it did end my running career, which was like really heartbreaking because the dream up until that point was to run at like a Division I school and to go to college and like pursue it at a higher level. You can't really run very fast with only one calf. So through no choice of my own, my running career was ended. And it was really tough for me because so much of my identity had kind of revolved around being an athlete, especially in like high school at such a young age. So to have that taken away from me and kind of the way it did so prematurely was really hard to come to terms with. But again, it's what made my eventual coming to rowing so special because it did fill a huge hole that I had in my life and like really made me feel as though I was an athlete again, because basically that year post injury, my whole senior year of high school was just entirely focused on rehabbing. I was in the hospital for extended periods of time, had multiple surgeries done on my back. And so much of kind of my sport senior year became rehabbing. I was, doing physical therapy exercises, 4 to 5 hours a day, going to like my physical therapist's office like 3 times a week. So yeah, looking back on it now, it's really interesting because it did start this incredible new journey that I would have never, ever imagined myself being on. But in the moment, it was just so tough to have kind of one door close because the second door hadn't quite opened yet.
I'd imagine, especially when you're so young, it's kind of hard to put into context, to see that it can offer you opportunities. And when you're in that moment, and when you're, you mentioned you were in hospital for long periods of time and you spent, a year rehabbing, what motivated you to then get back into sports and kind of get back to it when it's so easy? It could have been so easy to just sit back and say, that's me, I'm out, I'm not an athlete anymore.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Honestly, a lot of my drive early, like very early on, was to get back to running, because like science and like medical, like the medical field really doesn't still know a ton about like how nerves work. It's kind of one of the last like real mysteries about the human body. So a lot of the doctors weren't quite able to give me like a hard yes or no of like whether, the nerve damage is permanent. So I kind of took that as like, well, I'm going to fix it. So early on, it was like, I'm going to get back to running. As time progressed, obviously that became a little bit less realistic. And it was like, okay, this is looking to be permanent. So then I just kind of took this attitude of like, well, I'm not going to let this define me. It's like, it's been really bad. And it was tough to come to terms with the fact that it's like, okay, I'll never be able to run as fast as I used to, jump as high, lift as much. But I still was just like, you can't control the cards you're dealt in life, but you can control what you do with them. So that's the way I took it. And to be honest, there were definitely some months where it was just like, I was really depressed and I wasn't happy and I kind of sulked in it. And I just got to the point, I was like, I was 16, I was like, I have a long life ahead of me. I can't be this way for another, 60, 70 years. So that was kind of the realization that, a lot of my friends and family tried to give me, but it was something that I kind of had to come to like on my own. And again, finally getting back into rowing and being part of a team again, an organized sport, that played like a huge role in it.
And then once you finished college, you went on to Gonzaga, which Irish people may think of as a school here, but it's a college over in the US. Why did you pick Gonzaga?
I hadn't really thought about rowing at all. So it was just purely academic. They offered me a scholarship and I really had always loved the state of Washington. Spokane's a cool city. It kind of just worked well. They had degrees that I was interested in. Really good basketball team. So it was fun. It was a lot of fun. Stuff. Exactly.
And then, so you started rowing in your first year of college, and I know a first year rowing, it's called a novice over in Ireland, and it's kind of comical because you have so much to learn in a year. How did you find that first year?
Oh, I was so bad. I actually almost got cut from our team because I was that bad. But fortunately, being 6'8", our coach was like, you have a lot of potential. If you weren't this tall, we would have cut you. He was very honest about it. And I have a great relationship with our assistant coach still to this day. But yeah, it was a lot to learn. So I have a lot of sympathy for all the novices out there. It's like, I get it. I've been there.
What was it that drew you into the sport that made you addicted to it or really kept you in it?
In a lot of ways, it is similar to distance running, just being that kind of power endurance, like pushing yourself. How hard can you go for how long? And that racing kind of mentality. There are a lot of like parallels and similarities between the two. So I think a lot of the things I loved about running, I found in rowing additionally. So it was really cool.
And then when did you start to really make serious progress as a senior in rowing, or when did you kind of get your first exposure to rowing for the national team or US rowing in general?
Yeah, so it would have been in my junior year, so third year of rowing. I actually figured out that I qualified through my disability for the Paralympics. So that was like very exciting for me because all of a sudden doors were starting to open up now because of this injury. And I kind of up until that point, I had taken it seriously, but it was like collegiate rowing. So it was always kind of like coming second to class and stuff. But once I figured out that I could, potentially be making national teams for this sport, like the intensity, the focus just ramped up to like 1,000. And I made my first national team later that year in 2018. Went to the World Championships in Bulgaria. That was really cool. And that was kind of like my first like real taste of like high level elite rowing. And I was like even more hooked than I was before.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then you then qualified for the Olympics as part of the mixed coxed four. Sorry, I had to think about that to get it right. What's the qualification procedure like for that, or to even get selected for the boat?
Yeah, so there's kind of like two-part, and one applies to like all Paralympic sports. Is there's like a classification process where they basically take like a team of professionals, both doctors and like experts in the sport, and they basically just do a bunch of tests on you to make sure that you're, telling the truth about your disability and you're not faking it. So that's step one, and that's always a little bit stressful. It's like the one time in your life you're like, I hope I'm like disabled enough, It's like, so that was kind of a funny circumstances. But after you get classified, then we hold a selection camp where we usually like to offer spots to the top like 6 to 8 men and 6 to 8 women in the country, and then we all just seat race and compete against each other to find the fastest lineup, and it's 2 guys and 2 girls.
And then once you went over to Tokyo, what was that experience like?
Oh, it was a dream come true. It was incredible, and like everything I dreamed of and more. In a way, it really did feel as like the competition was incredible, but it was more so than just like being there and being a part of this like world community and being a part of like the adaptive sport community. I mean, you saw people from all ranges of ability, all sorts of disabilities. And it was just so cool because for so much of my life, I always felt a bit as an outsider. And like I limp a little bit when I walk because of the nerve damage and stuff. And I've always been afraid for people to see it because everyone is always like, what's wrong with you? And it's like, they're saying it in a nice way, thinking like, oh, maybe I hurt my knee or something. But it's like, well, this isn't quite a casual conversation to have right now. But being in the village and looking around, like I really felt like I belonged. Like I didn't feel like I had to hide anything. And I felt like I could be myself, which was just incredible. And the power that sport has to give people those opportunities and to make a community like that on such an international scale was the coolest part about it easily.
And then that's not even talking about the racing. I know we watched you qualify pretty convincingly for the final over here. And then you went out in the final and you won a silver medal. And then like, how does that feel crossing the line?
Oh, again, just such an honor and just such a dream come true to be able to not only represent your country on like such a world stage, but to do well and to win a medal and bring a medal home for your country. I think it really honor is like the biggest word that comes to mind. And again, it's a dream come true. I mean, who would have thought? Like, I was a good distance runner, but I wasn't going to go to the Olympics. I wasn't going to medal at the Olympics. So kind of go all the way back now. It's like to be achieving this level of, sport.
16-year-old you would be very proud, I'm guessing.
I like to think so, yeah.
And then after you win your medal, you cross the line, there's the podium. And then you did something, I can see you smiling, you did something unusual, I will say, on the podium. Do you want to, which I think is fantastic, but do you want to explain what went down on the podium?
Yeah. So during the award ceremony, after they'd kind of given us our medals and the Great Britain, who's the team that won, their national anthem played, during pictures, I had a shirt on under our like medal ceremony outfit that said "Justice for Oscar Grant," who is he was a man from 22 from Oakland, my home city, that in 2009 was shot and killed. He was unarmed, restrained, face down on New Year's Day. He was shot and killed in the back by BART police officers. And the guy was found guilty. He ended up only serving about 11 months, which just, in my opinion, is not justice. And it was the first time in my life that I'd really been exposed to just the outright racism that so much of America is plagued by. So it was really eye-opening for me. And, he was a member of our community. I didn't know him myself, but to have it hit that close to home and to realize that so few people knew who he was. I think especially with this summer going on, so many people kind of started to get on the BLM movement without knowing the history of it. And I wanted to bring the light to people that, like, hey, this has been going on for a lot longer than Oscar Grant, but even in like somewhat recent times in your life, it's happened. And then also, I wanted to do it for Oakland, and I wanted to bring attention to this case because he's from my home and he deserved better than what he got.
Yeah, and staying on the topic then of equality and, treating everyone equally, looking at the Paralympics and looking at disability in sport, do you think we're in an acceptable place right now, or do you think there's still a lot to improve?
There's still so much to improve. It's interesting because we are currently in like the best, every Paralympics gets better and better. So it's the best it's ever been, but it's still nowhere close to being equal to the Olympics. I can't necessarily speak on an international scale for like specific countries, but within the US, the boat class I'm in is one of the most successful in the history of the sport. And we consistently receive, less than like a third of what Olympic squads get. So it's just always a battle working with your governing bodies, international bodies of sport to try and continue that conversation and further the cause of getting more equity and equality within the sport, because it's not there yet. And it's far from it. And even in the US, although I pointed out the flaws, it is one of the best places for it, which is a shame because there's so much work that still needs to be done. So especially on the international scale with a lot of like developing countries and stuff, bigger than just sport, accessibility needs to be increased. I'm talking to some athletes from developing countries. Their favorite part about it was there was a wheelchair ramp everywhere, and it's like, that's crazy that you have to be. It was beautiful, but sad in a way, because these athletes, every time, like everything they say is they feel socially accepted, kind of what I was saying, and everything's accessible, which makes like these 2 weeks at the Paralympics so incredible. But it's like, those are just basic kind of human rights almost, to like feel accepted in your community and to have access to like basic things like a bathroom, a shower, an elevator. And it's like, you shouldn't have to be one of the world's best elite athletes to get that for 2 weeks once every 4 years. And I really think that sums up how much work we still have to do, that so many Paralympic athletes' takeaways from the game is how cool it was to have like basic things.
And then after the Paralympics, you packed up your bag straight away and came over, which I think is surreal. You went straight from Tokyo over to Dublin to study as a sports scholar over in Trinity College Dublin. Why? I know you could have gone to so many places, so why Trinity?
Yeah, a lot of reasons. I'd always wanted to see Ireland. I'd never been here before, so that was exciting in itself. Our teammate, the other guy that was in the boat with me, John Tangway, he graduated last year from Trinity and also rode for the program, kind of, because of COVID. But during his limited experience here that was allowed, he loved it. He had great things to say. So he's kind of actually one of the people that helped get the ball rolling with that. Speaking to the coaches, everyone seemed really nice. The team seemed great. Seemed like a really good fit. And then on the school side of things, I'm studying comparative social change, which is a sociology degree. And, I feel like talking how we have today is probably no surprise that that's what I'm passionate about and want to get into. So I really just saw it as a continuation of a lot of things in my life. I can continue my rowing career. I can continue my, education career to then hopefully get a professional career after this. So it was a perfect fit in like so many different ways. And I'm so glad to be here.
And how have you found it, both rowing and studying?
Oh, I've loved it. It's been a dream come true. Everyone is so nice. I love the team. I love my classes. All of my classmates are so nice. The professors are great. It's really like, at first I was a little worried coming because, as you said, it was just such a quick turnover, but as soon as I got here, everyone was so helpful, and it took like 2 days, and I was like, okay, I made the right decision. This is great.
And then looking forward after this year, what's the plan then? Can go back to America and keep rowing, or go down a professional path?
That's the $1 million question. I don't know yet. I definitely see myself training for Paris, the next Paralympic Games. Hopefully within that, working maybe part-time. I've been kind of looking at a couple cities like Los Angeles, Austin, Texas, and Washington, D.C. are probably like the 3 leading places because there's strong rowing there, so I could train. And then there's also a lot of potential jobs for what I'm interested in.
Just a broader question. We talked about what motivated you when you were, going through your rehab and your recovery, but now you're at where you're at. You're a silver medalist, Paralympian. What motivates you now?
Yeah, great question. Well, early on, a lot of the motivation was making the podium like this last year and protesting. So to have that achieved, it is a little interesting. It's like, okay, you did that. What's next? I mean, right now, the big motivator for me is I want to win colors. I want to win national championship. So it's I think that's important for training, is to kind of always have something short-term and something long-term that you're working for. So short-term, it's definitely having like a really successful season with Trinity and, hopefully winning everything. Long-term, it's going to another games. It's to feel that community again, because it truly was so special. And it really only does come around once every 4 years, unfortunately. So I think that's the big motivator, is just to go back. And it's kind of funny. It's not even necessarily winning or getting another medal. It's to be a part of that community again and to experience it again. And honestly, experience the games without COVID, because it was a little weird not being able to do anything and not having any fans. It was still incredible, but to experience kind of a normal games would be really cool.
Yeah. And then I did warn you about this, so I hope you have a good answer. But if you had to recommend, I always ask my interviewees on the Grad Life podcast, but if you had to recommend one book to the listeners today, sporting related, non-sporting related, academic, non-academic, fiction, non-fiction, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would probably, at the risk of sounding like a nerd, say Lord of the Rings. I love Lord of the Rings. I think I've read them like 5 or 6 times at this point. I think they're great. One of the reasons I love them, though, is they are long, so you have to kind of get into it. So it's a bit of a commitment, almost like you're committing to this book. And then additionally, they're just so like deep, and you can just escape in them. So it's like, if you're having a bad day, if training's not going well, you can just open up this book and like fully get immersed in this complete alternate reality, which is really fun.
Thank you, Charlie, for talking to me. It's been a really enjoyable 20 or 30 minutes. I know I'm going to be following your career at Trinity Rowing and US Rowing and see what you do with your degree as well, with a lot of interest. So thank you for speaking with me today.
Of course. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.